Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Hatfield Marine Science Center. My name is George Bollard. I'm director here at Hatfield. I've been here since 2002. We're really glad you're able to come out for the first official Marine Science Day. Some of you may have been in past years to the Seafest activities that we had here, and this is the way we have decided to go in the future with having an open house for the facility here. One of the things whenever we put one of these on that I do want to mention, it's an immense amount of work, and we have a lot of people who have come in and volunteered to help out with all the work that's been done here. And you've seen the volunteers from the visitor center that we have here at Hatfield. We have a number of members from the community. And I want to highlight at the back of the room, Marianne Boza, who's trying to run out the door right now. She works in the director's office here and has done just a marvelous job of organizing everyone for this Science Day, and it has really turned out well. So I hope you all enjoyed it. And it's my pleasure today for these talks to introduce the next speaker, who will tell you a little bit about research at Oregon State and introduce the subsequent speaker. But Dr. Rick Spinrad is the Vice President for Research at Oregon State University, and he oversees any of the centers within the university, like the Hatfield Marine Science Center, with the intent of fostering interdisciplinary research that encompasses all of the different activities that we do at Oregon State. So at a place like this, instead of just being a typical department, we have the opportunity here to have people from 7 different colleges of Oregon State University doing education or research or outreach activities. And it really improves not only the range of research we do, but also the very multidisciplinary research where people in one college are able to work with people in another college transparently to get a lot more bang for the buck of the research that we do. Oregon State University is really good at that in general. Now, Dr. Spinrad is no stranger to OSU. He graduated with a master's degree here in oceanography in 2000. He's not that young.
2000, sure.
1978, and then a PhD in 1982, which coincidentally I was in the college as a young faculty member at that time. I was young, but I think he's younger. So he's done very well and has had a very distinguished career in a variety of places, most recently in Washington, D.C., before he came back to Oregon a few years ago. He was very prominent in the Office of Naval Research with research at the U.S. Navy in support of the Department of Defense. He then went on to NOAA, which is a big important component of our programs here. Where he headed 2 separate line offices of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. First, the National Ocean Service, and secondly, the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, which is really the premier research organization within NOAA's element and big portfolio of research. We're really pleased to have him back. He's really doing a great job in the research office, reinvigorating a lot of things, improving our capability to respond rapidly to research questions, to get better relationships with industry. And we really are having a good time with research now because the research enterprise at OSU is growing really remarkably. So it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Spinrad.
Thank you, George. So I literally am here wearing 2 hats, and I've brought 2 hats. I'm going to share those with you in a moment. But before I start, actually, I want to take a minute and ask the audience to give a hand to George. He has put in extraordinary... Okay, so my faculty appointment is in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. So it's in my blood, whenever I see a group like this together, to do a pop quiz, okay? So we're going to do a pop quiz here. And what I want you to do is I want you to raise your hand and hold your hand up if the answer to the question is yes, okay? So did you have a slice of bread or a piece of toast in the last week?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Okay, I probably don't even need to go any further, but I'm going to ask another question. Keep your hand up, please. There are a few who don't have their hand up. If you don't have your hand up, do you know anyone who has suffered from cancer? And the final question is, how many of you have driven over a bridge in the state of Oregon within the last, I'll say 6 hours? Very good. Everybody in the room probably has their hands up. There may be one or two exceptions, but I guarantee you I could ask one or two more questions and you'd had your hands up. Every one of those areas that I addressed in those questions has been impacted by OSU research. 60% of the wheat grown in this state is from an Oregon State University derived variety. Right now we're doing extraordinary research on cancer discoveries. And every bridge in the state of Oregon benefits from the College of Engineering going way back 70 or 80 years ago. And if you look at the lineage of the civil engineers that were involved, they were all associated with Oregon State. But wait, there's more, because it really gets exciting when you see where things are going to go. And George told me I only have 2 hours for this talk. But imagine for just a minute, 5 years from now, when you go buy a new car, and the windshield on that car will probably have something called a heads-up display. Embedded in the windshield will be transparent transistors that will show you everything that's currently on your dashboard. It may give you your GPS navigation as well. Those things are being developed. Transparent transistors are being developed and actually patented at Oregon State University. Imagine also that 5 years from now, you go to the store, you buy a box of strawberries, and there's a recall. That actually happened last year, remember that? You had to pull back the strawberries, all the strawberries. Now imagine if every strawberry was barcoded, and you could tell exactly what field it came from and when it was harvested. 5 years from now, because of research going on at Oregon State University, we will be able to do those kinds of things. It's extraordinary. Oregon State University brings in more research funding per year than every other school in the Oregon University system combined. Over $250 million worth of research, but even more important than that, in the last about 10 years, Oregon State University derived intellectual property, the ideas and concepts that our research developed, have resulted in over $160 million of outside funding coming in to support new businesses and hundreds of new companies forming throughout the state, here in the Valley, in Central Oregon, in the Gorge, everywhere. It is truly an extraordinary place for research, and it's a real treat for an alum like me to come back and be at the head of the class, if you will, with respect to research. Leading programs in agriculture, leading programs in environmental humanities, toxicology, and, of course, marine sciences. So now I get to put this hat on. This is the Wacoma, the ship we just decommissioned a little while ago. I am an Oregon State University alum. As you heard from George, I got my degrees in oceanography, physical oceanography, so please don't ask me about the octopus or the clams or anything else. If you want to talk about circulation, we could talk about it. Oregon State University has one of the top marine science programs in the world by any measure. And when I say marine science, I'm talking about oceanography. The College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences was recently ranked in the top 5 in the nation in terms of research productivity and education. We've got one of the best Sea Grant programs, Sea Grant college programs in the nation. I can tell you that because I used to be in charge of all of the Sea Grant college programs in the nation. Hatfield Marine Science Center, what a gem, what an incredible place to do research, outreach, education. We are clearly the leading institution one of the leading institutions in the country. And what's really exciting is that we're starting to see funding agencies reflect that. So we now have a responsibility for something called the Ocean Observatories Initiative. You'll be hearing a lot more about that. How can we observe the ocean the way we observe weather? We are also one of the national marine renewable energy centers. So you want to learn about wave energy, you want to learn about wind energy, this is the place to come. Really an incredible place, which makes it even more exciting and relevant and an honor for me to introduce the First Lady of our fine state, Ms. Sylvia Hayes. And let me just say a few words about why Ms. Hayes is an ideal speaker for us today. She has been working for the last 20 years at the intersection of environmental stewardship, economic development, and policy advice. She's got 2 degrees in environmental studies and has been truly an environmental entrepreneur in her own work and her own consulting activity. In fact, last year, after the governor took office, there was an interview in the Oregonian. Don't worry, I'm not going into depth on that. But a friend was quoted as saying that she's not so much an environmentalist as she is herself part of the environment. What a great way to describe your career. You have been an important advocate for marine science. I'm especially delighted to point out to those of you who don't know that the First Lady has identified Healthy Ocean as one of her top initiatives, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that. But it goes even deeper. It goes in even deeper if you just take the time to look at the First Lady's website. And what you see there is an impressive characterization of the issues that we have to deal with in the ocean: sustainable fisheries, renewable energy, protection from tsunamis. And even more valuable is information there on what you and I and every single Oregonian can do to address these very important problems. My own sense is that here in a state where our motto is Alis volat propris, she flies with her own wings, we couldn't be more honored to have Ms. Sylvia Hayes as our First Lady. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Sylvia.
My goodness, I think that is the best introduction I have ever had. I'd like to get a little audio tape of that so when I'm feeling low about myself, I can play it back. I think standing up behind a eloquent Latin-speaking professor who could moonlight as a stand-up comedian is a hard act to follow, no question. Well, I am just delighted to be here today. I am a born and bred landlubber. My entire ancestry comes from Oklahoma and Arkansas. My mom left her first husband for his younger brother, and they had to get the heck out of Dodge. And that's how I wound up in the Pacific Northwest. So I was raised up in really rough, like kind of almost Little House on the Prairie type rough, up in the foothills of Washington State. Again, you know, landlocked. But my families, they were hunters and fishers. And every year, my family and a handful of others that were our close friends, we would go out salmon fishing to Nia Bay. And this started from the time I was a really little kid. And it was serious meat fishing. I mean, we would go way out, and we would catch enough fish that through the canning and whatever, it was important to our diet, because we did not have a lot of money, for months afterwards. And I think, I'm certain that that really made a lasting impression on me. I mean, I can still remember, I was a rough little tomboy, so I always went out with the guys in the boat. And I can remember the excitement when the fish started hitting. I can remember the fascination with those big silver bodies when they came in, some of which were as long as I was tall at that time. Fortunately, I didn't get seasick as a little kid, so that was a good thing for me. And I also have really powerful early memories of beach combing and checking out tidal pools with my mom, and it really made an impression on me. Still to this day, when I find myself just a little worn out, when I really need some restoration, I very often find myself somewhere near the ocean, on the coast. And in fact, the governor and I spent some time on the Oregon coast when we had a couple days to recover right after the campaign, and we just went on our very first honest-to-God vacation in about 4 years and went down to Monterey. I have had the great good fortune to be enchanted by whale song in Hawaii and see perhaps those very same humpback whales in Alaska. And interestingly, could be Oregon trivia. Both the governor and I independent, obviously, and very early in our careers, we each went through a phase where we thought we were going to be marine biologists. And obviously we took different paths, but the passion and the commitment to ocean health and coastal communities, still it's very strong for us. Very delighted to be here as part of the first Newport Marine Science Day. I think that, you know, one of the things that always surprises me when I'm here or in Monterey or talking with some of the certifiably smart people in this field is how often you ask a question and you hear, you know, we don't really know yet. Maybe, we're not really sure. There's just so much left to be learned about the incredibly important ocean resources. I really do think that gaining a better understanding and doing a better job protecting our oceans is one of the single most important issues of our generation. Incredibly, incredibly important. I think it's hard to overestimate or overstate the importance of our oceans. They're incredibly important to jobs growth, to prosperity. They provide us with food, water. They regulate the climate. They provide oxygen to breathe. They are truly fundamental to life. And whether you live on the beach or are an inland land lover, they are essential and important. But our oceans, as most of you I'm sure know, are facing mounting pressures. We've got a world population growing toward 10 billion people. The need for protein will have never been greater. Ocean acidification, we're ground zero for that here in the Pacific Northwest. A tremendous problem with pollution and plastics in the water column. A lot of issues that we really need to address. The Kitzhaber administration is taking ocean and coastal issues very seriously, and I'll touch on just a couple of the initiatives that I am most excited about. One of those is, I'm delighted to report, after years of navigating controversial waters, we've passed 5 new marine reserves here in Oregon. Yes. The 5 sites cover 42 square miles. There's an additional 27 square miles that are not complete reserves, but they're also protected areas, kind of buffer zone. Very, very important for us. The very first marine reserve was established in Port Orford, and I actually came from Port Orford this morning. I was down there yesterday to speak at their water festival, and a couple of weeks ago, actually it's probably been, my life is a blur, it's probably been a couple of months ago now, the governor and I were there to be part of the premiere of a movie called Ocean Frontiers. How many in the room have seen it? I really, really recommend that you take a look at it. First of all, Port Orford is one of the communities featured in the film. But what I love about it is they feature 4 different places around the country that are ocean management success stories. It's a very positive message. I think one of the things that is most noteworthy about the Port Orford effort is just how community-driven the process of protecting and putting a ridge-to-reef protected area was. When the governor and I were down there, we got to take a tour of the Redfish Rock Marine Reserve, and we were on the fishing vessel Top Gun, whose captain is Jeff Miles, very salt of the earth, great guy. The fishermen down there were instrumental in working with the conservation community and the scientists and everyone else to determine what the appropriate size and shape of the marine reserve could be. And the first proposal that they put forward with this Jeff of Top Gun was kind of in the lead on this, was not really acceptable to some of the conservation community. They wanted more. And they went back and forth pretty respectfully because they all lived together in this small community. And eventually, Jeff wound up giving one of his very best personal fishing spots to the reserve. And when we were out on his boat with him, he took us over to the spot, and he looked down and he said, "Man, this was one of my most productive places. It pained me to give it up. It pains me still, but I know it's right for the future." And it was just a really powerful and memorable moment for me. The second area, so we've got the marine reserves moving forward. Still lots of work to be done implementing them, but very exciting time, I think, in Oregon. The second piece of work that we're doing through the governor's office right now was mentioned with the wave energy. This is a tremendous potential opportunity for our coastal communities. Oregon has some of the very best wave energy potential in North America, but it needs to be done carefully because we need to do it in a way that does not conflict with our fisheries, our crabbing industry, et cetera. And so we're really working, again, through a very collaborative process to determine where are the areas that we could harness that opportunity in a way that is complementary to these other industries. And then the third piece, and this is one that I particularly am spearheading, you know, it's just such an interesting situation that as we sit here right now, due to the tsunami, the Japan tsunami, Brookings is rebuilding, Japan is reeling. I'm telling you, we were over there in the fall, and it's critical where they're at as a result of that. And the West Coast states are trying to figure out how are we actually going to deal with who knows how many tons of debris are making their way to our shores on the currents of the Pacific. And I have to give credit to Keith Phillips, who's Governor Gregoire's natural resource advisor. He knew that I was going to be working on ocean health issues wearing my First Lady hat, and he had an idea that maybe our states could team up and figure out ways to develop kind of an ongoing awareness-raising campaign related to the tsunami cleanup issue. So we're really looking at that. I've had conversation with folks here today about how we can link with Newport and this facility particularly in doing some of that. So it's just a very, I think that the tsunami debris cleanup very powerfully makes the point that our oceans do indeed connect us all. We are all in it together. I also want to just call out some of the leadership that Oregon's fishing industry has put forward. We are really on the forefront of sustainable fishing developments, products, certifications, and as part of the tour, if you haven't seen it yet and get a chance to visit the display from Fish and Wildlife, they're doing a lot of sustainable fisheries work. How many of you know that Oregon's pink shrimp fishery is the very first fishery in the world to be given Marine Stewardship Council sustainability certification? It's pretty significant. Our Dungeness crab fishery, which is our most economically important fishery, was MSC certified in 2010. We're the very first state on the West Coast to put in place pot restrictions so that we didn't have quite as much equipment and therefore some lost debris going into our oceans. Really important leadership there. Bamboo Sushi in Portland, Oregon. If you ever get a chance, it's a relatively new restaurant. They are already in the black. They're the world's first certified sustainable sushi restaurant. They've got a business model. Young social entrepreneur is leading this thing, and they've got a business model where they're investing in marine reserves all around the globe, and their goal right now is one fish in for one fish out. And they're hoping to actually improve that ratio. Really, really cutting edge entrepreneurial leadership. And then again, one more shout out to Port Orford. They've got a Port Orford sustainable seafood project that's underway now. Again, it's very locally grounded. They are promoting the use of local fish. They are really working to make sure that their fishers are well paid for the products that they produce. And they're really working to try to do a better job in educating consumers about the species that we're actually eating. I did not know until I learned about that program that Oregon rockfish in most grocery stores are promoted as red snapper. And red snapper comes from the Gulf Coast. It doesn't even come from here. So a little bit more accurate scientific information about what we're harvesting and consuming is a big focus with the Port Orford Sustainable Seafood Project. Let me just close by saying that the governor and I really appreciate what's happening here in Newport and the leadership that you all are showing in saying, yes, we know we need economic development. The coastal and rural areas have been particularly hard hit by our boom and bust economic cycles. But this community looked forward and said, you know, we're not just going to necessarily take the path of least resistance. We're really going to step up and develop a new economy approach, a clean economy approach. And you're on to something very powerful with this marine research, products, technologies. This will be an export industry, even the knowledge and the intellectual property, as we talked about, as the world faces increasing pressures to protect our ocean resources. I think the science being conducted here, I mean, let's face it, we have some of the very best of the best and brightest in this entire field right here in Newport, Oregon. I love bragging about that. You know, it makes my job right now even funner than it might have been. And it's incredibly important science. As I said before, we know so little about these systems that are absolutely critical, not only to our economy and our enjoyment, but to the very survival of a healthy planet. So it's very exciting what you all are doing. Delighted to see such a great turnout here today. And with that, I want to just leave you with words from Mother Teresa. She said, quote, "We ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean would be less because of that missing drop. So thank you for what you're doing." And now I have the honor of introducing a whale of a fellow. Dr. Bruce Mate is an endowed professor of wildlife and director of the Oregon State University Marine Mammal Institute based at the OSU Hatfield Marine Science Center. He has conducted marine mammal research since 1967. That's when I was born. When he started figuring out the migration habits of California sea lions for his PhD. He did a postdoctorate in biochemistry studying the way sea lions detoxify mercury. His research has included population assessment, marine mammal fishery conflicts, and ecology. He pioneered the development of satellite-monitored radio tags for manatees, small cetaceans, and large whales. For the last 20 years, his whale research has focused on identification of migration routes and important seasonal habitats of endangered whales, including the gray whale, right, bowhead, humpback, sperm, fin, and blue whales. He uses the data he collects to reduce human impacts on whales and promote their population recovery. Dr. Mate.
Thank you so much. Well, I can honestly say that that's the first time anybody's alluded to me being certifiable where I thought I might have some pride in it. Make sure I'm on here. I'm colorblind, and I'm told that the light comes on a particular color. Sean, please.
You're all set.
Oh, thanks. So certified color vision I do not have. Well, I'm told that probably half the people in the room who have gray hair have not a clue what the title of my talk means. So if you're in the Twitter generation, it's, oh my God, whales Twitter, they're best friends forever. That's you. You might not have known it yet, but you guys really are a whale's best friend. And I'm going to show you some of the reasons why and how they, in fact, communicate with us in this day and age. So some of the Twitter, I think, if their flippers could manage the keyboard, might be in some areas we need help. And that's some of what we focus on here at the Marine Science Center with the programs we're doing with large whales. So I want to introduce you to a couple of the species we work with. And Sylvia was very kind to mention so many species that we've worked with. And it's been a great joy. This is a blue whale. And I'm just going to temporarily turn the lights off here so you can get the sense of scale. The boat we're in as we approach these animals is 20 feet long for scale. So these are the largest animals that have ever lived on Earth, larger than dinosaurs, weigh up to 120 tons, and they eat small things. And by the way, when it says their voice can be heard 1,500 miles, that means an animal off Hawaii can virtually be heard right out here off the jetties. I mean, we're talking some real power here. Is it okay to have the lights up a little bit? Great, okay. So I'm going to try and give you a sense of what it is like to be around a sperm whale. Now, sperm whales dive a mile deep to feed for an hour at a time. And it's in complete darkness. So when you're down with a sperm whale, this is what you would hear. That sperm whale is actually acoustically brailing me about what is this I see in front of me. It could be pitch black, and that animal would know if I had a penny in my stomach, a pin in my ankle, you know, it's an amazing thing, or the zipper on my coat was plastic instead of metal. So these animals make a living really more with their ears, even though you don't see these big pinnas on the outside of them, than they do with their vision. And we'll get back to looking at some of those details. So one of the things we did early on here at the Science Center, starting in 2001, was start to study sperm whales, because in the Gulf of Mexico, 80% of the new wells that have gone in the last decade have been in water over 800 meters. And that means about 3,000 feet. And these wells are right in the midst of sperm whale habitat. When we started the project there, people didn't even really know whether sperm whales were just seasonally occurring or year-round animals. So again, an animal's long period of time going down on a single breath, and remember, they're a mammal, so they're air breathers. And they're feeding on squids, some of which are from myself to the back of the stage, giant squids. If you remember seeing Captain Nemo, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, kind of snickering about that, those animals really exist. From the beak sizes we've found in sperm whale stomachs, it's estimated that some of the squids may approach 74 feet long. Now, probably most of them are about my size. It's a little intimidating to tell you that and then get in the water with a sperm whale, right? But remember, because it has echolocation capabilities, it can see I have ribs, and squids don't have ribs. Now, that sort of should seem satisfying, but somehow at a quarter of a mile or half a mile away, and you're swimming along, and you hear these animals go click, 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 and all of a sudden you dive down, and it goes bang, 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 and you can feel it in your lungs. You go, oh my goodness. It's like driving down the road, and everything, you're looking around, and then a deer jumps out, and your attention's directed to it. And you realize that this sperm whale has focused on you as something new it sees in its headlights. It's also a great joy, I might add. So we developed a technology here at OSU that allows us to track whales by satellite. We actually have things that go on animals. I'll show you some of them. And when the whale's at the surface, it sends a message up to the satellite, and then it comes back down to an Earth station. Now, it can't send messages through seawater, and the satellite's going around the Earth every 101 minutes. So the coincidence of those two things have to match up, and we only allow them to transmit for about 4 hours a day. The tags aren't a whole lot bigger than this pointer, and just like a flashlight, if you left it on all the time, it would get used up in a day. So we have to be very parsimonious with how we let the power go out of that and communicate with us. We do that by going out in Coast Guard, ex-Coast Guard rigid hull inflatable boats. And that little platform off the front, that extra 6 feet gives us about 3 times the chance of being successful tagging a whale, because the whales actually, even though when they're down deep or using sounds and all that, when they're at the surface, they're basically recovering their oxygen debt. And they're probably just, you know, taking it all in, and then we pull up quietly behind them. And it's actually when we pull up where they can see the hull, they startle, whether we tag them or not. They, whoa, what's that? You know, because they aren't used to these kinds of things being out. So having that little bit of advantage is a big help. That's the tag we put on, and it, as I mentioned, transmits to a satellite that when it comes over the horizon is 2,500 miles out, and it does that with a 0.5 watt signal. Now that's like a kid's walkie-talkie, you know. It's line of sight, and that also means that when there are big waves and things like that, when the animal's down and the wave blocks it, it doesn't get to the satellite. Sperm whales live in extended groups. We used to say extended family groups, thinking they were a lot like killer whales or orca, where it's a matrilineal society and all the animals in the group are pretty well related through the mother's line. But we now know from the genetics work that we've done is that those animals are not all from the same maternal lineage. But most of them are females, and I'll just say that the females are a lot more social. These groups stay together for very long periods of time, and you can find groups of males like this too. The only problem is it's ephemeral. 2 months later, they'll still be in groups, but they'll be in different groups. So they're moving around a lot more. We all know that females are a lot more successful networking, right? Well, this is the type of tag that we put on most recently that's really successful. This is about 3.5 inches in diameter, so small McDonald's hamburger kind of size. That's the push rod that just put it on. And this tag is really remarkable. It collects information with GPS quality, knows right where the animal is. When the animal goes down, it collects the information about its dive depth every second throughout the dive in 2-meter accuracy, so a little over 6 feet. And it'll do that for months at a time. Now we get that information back by satellite while the animal's swimming around in, I'll call it executive abstracts. It says, here's the duration of the dive, here's the maximum depth of the dive, and this is sort of the general shape. But when the tag's done with its mission, it pops off the whale, floats to the surface, and we go out and collect it because it sends us its address by GPS, right? So we go out and scoop it up. And then we have every bit of data that the animal has been collected off the animal for the whole time. Now we did this last summer, and it included 3-axis accelerometers. I'm going to show you some of that. It allows us to tell when the animal's feeding. Probably also when they're mating, but we aren't exploring that in this talk, okay? This will give you an idea. Our first attempt to do this is in the Gulf of California. It used to be called the Sea of Cortez, no longer politically correct, by the way. Cortez was a conqueror. The Mexicans don't like that. But the Gulf of California is an extension of the San Andreas Fault, so it's really deep. And the Baja Peninsula is moving away from the continent at the rate of about your fingernails growth. And these are dives of sperm whales in that area. And we actually tagged, in this case, 3 females that were in the same social group. And I just wanted to demonstrate to you that, yes, they really do go to the restroom together all the time. And they go off. They really are bonded. And if you look at the way they dive, I expected them to all do exactly the same thing because they were going to the same places at the same time. But here you can see they aren't even coordinated and going up and down at the same time all of the time. It does happen sometimes, like here where they come up together and go down together. And you can see at times the red animal's doing its deepest dive, and other times the yellow animal, sometimes the blue animal. And we couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And I have to say we still aren't sure, okay? Sylvie alluded to the fact that scientists are willing to say that they don't know. That isn't quite true. What we do is we come up with a swag. Do you know what a swag is? It's a scientific wild-ass guess, okay? And now, I know that I've got a lot of administration here. They'd much rather I refer to this as a scientific hypothesis, but let's be true. There's a lot of possibilities, okay? And scientists have different interpretations of data. So that's one of our merits, actually, is our strength is we get together and talk this stuff through. Then we agree on the same swag one way or another. So when we look at whales from different groups, there really are some animals that have a lot of capabilities. This is the dive depths that they're diving over here, so down to almost 1,600 meters. And some animals are specialists. Even though they're capable of deep dives, they prefer to do things that are mostly shallow. And by the way, these animals are all of the same size, so it's not size related. Now, here's where it gets a little spicy. We know that as we all need oil and gas, so when I said we were doing things to look at oil and gas influences on sperm whales in the Gulf of Mexico, we had 4 years of baseline work from 2001 through 2005. And then most recently, of course, in 2010, the Deepwater Horizon happened. And awful incident, of course. The main thing about this as an emphasis is it's deep. It really is deep. And the oil's pouring out. Here you see a plane applying dispersants at the surface. And this is the time frame. Well, before the wellhead was closed off, we had mobilized within 28 days, and we had a dozen animals tagged within sight of the oil well. So it was pretty neat to be both having a background of knowing what would we expect to be normal and to be there while the oil was still flowing. There were some pretty interesting things. This is going to come out in Bioscience in about 3 weeks as a part of a publication from a group of ecotoxicologists that I've been a part of on this. And it was perfectly logical to put dispersants here on the oil slick to keep it from coming to the beach. Highly successful. The use of dispersants at depth has never been done before, and the volume of dispersants is unprecedented. So one of the things that happens is you get a certain direction of flow, perhaps from winds and surface currents on the surface, and that's what people's focused attention's on. But you have a dispersant and subsurface oil plume that may go in a different direction. And so even just trying to figure out where you look for impacts can become a challenge. And this will give you an idea of the scale. This is the Exxon Valdez incident in millions of barrels, and this is the Deepwater Horizon incident. The only thing that comes close in magnitude, or larger rather, is the Kuwaiti oil fields. But that was on land. So this is an interesting example of marine oiling. Now I told you that the new tags we have actually provide us with information about 3-axis accelerometry. What does that mean? If you're in a plane going along, you would notice this as pitch, roll, and yaw, or in a boat. So a lot of you who don't like motion sickness don't want to see a lot of accelerometry data, in person. But on the animal, what it does is, as the animal's swimming along, and here's the sperm whale going down from the surface down to depths and hunting, and then coming back to the surface to resume its oxygen debt, we've summarized when do we see these really extreme lunges. And it turns out that it's almost exclusively when they're down at the bottom. And the feeling is that these are lunges to grab these squids. There's some folks have had acoustic data collectors on devices that last with suction cups for a few hours to a day. And they've identified that when these lunges occur, they also hear creaks. So let me demonstrate what that's like. A sperm whale's going along looking for prey, and he's doing just regular clicks, kind of looking. And then all of a sudden there'll be upsweep, high frequency, a lot of information, so you can make that quick grab and get something in the dark. Well, so between that acoustic information and these 3-axis things, we now get that sort of information and can have it for periods of up to 45 days like we have here. And you can see that this first third of this is really different than the second third. So we're very scientific term, wiggles, right? Wiggles per dive duration. This is a month and a half long here. I'll just show you an example of what we're looking for when we do that. That first third coincides with when that sperm whale, this is the Mississippi River Delta. That's where the Deepwater Horizon event was. Florida's off over here to the right. So this is the first 15 days, and that animal was not alone. We had other animals being tracked at the same time. This was the rest of the group that associated with that animal during the same 15 days. And during the second 15 days, it wasn't much different. It shifted a bit over to the west, but there were lots of other animals with it. And during the third 15 days, it was dramatically farther to the west. And again, there were some animals with it. If we looked for the whole period of time of what those animals that were tagged within sight of the Deepwater Horizon did for the first 7 months here, you can see that they came all the way over actually into Mexican waters, some of them over into the Florida coast, well down that coast. And this is that same group of animals for just the period July through October. Sorry, this is the group of animals this year that we tagged from July through October. You can see there's much larger offshore component here than there was in the other year. And this is up through February of this year. Much more emphasis on deeper waters, less emphasis on the inshore area. And can I say what that means right now? We're working on it. But it does look like the home range of females, remember they stay together in a group, is about twice as large as they were during the times before the oil spill. Now, what does that mean? I've got some swags around it, and one of them is that squid may be a little more difficult to find. They might need to range a bit further in order to find enough to make ends meet. But that's really weak because we don't have very much information about squids. And so that's one of the areas. In fact, we're going to be working with Kelly Benoit Bird and others on campus who have really great expertise in identifying electronically and acoustically what some of these food resources look like. Here's one of the pieces of information we get from those fancy tags. This is the amount of time, the duration the animals spend at the surface recovering their oxygen debt between long dives. There's a lot of variability here. Most of it's down here, but look at, here's some animals that are down for 5 and 6 hours, or up at the surface for 5 or 6 hours. And if this was just one animal, I'd say, wow, it looks like about every 10 days, need to do something different. But it's all the animals put together. So we're still working on parts of this, but if you boil that information down to what's the average amount of time an animal spends at the surface daily, it would be a distribution like this. Why is any of that important? I'll give you an example. We want to figure out how many sperm whales there are in the Gulf of Mexico. So we take a plane and we fly from Florida to Texas. And everybody's looking out the window and we see 100 whales. Wow, is that good, bad, or indifferent? I don't know. But how many do you think there really are? So if they go down for, let's say, 50 minutes, and they're at the surface for 10, that means 1/6 of the time they're at the surface. Now, if we were on a boat and we just sat in one spot for an hour, it'd be pretty hard to miss one of those whales coming up close to us. We'd feel pretty confident we counted all of them. But if we're in a plane going fast, we're only over that area for a short period of time. What percentage of the whales are likely to be seen? So this kind of information, the modelers would call it G0, is the percentage of time animals are available to be counted. And it makes a difference whether you're on a ship or a plane, but it's what the NOAA scientists need to come up with good population estimates. And this is how hard it is. And put this together for a friend in NOAA who's got that exact job. He wanted a number. He said, well, tell me what percentage of the time. I said, well, here's for one animal. Sometimes it's as low as 6 minutes is the average at the surface, and sometimes the average for a day is as high as 25 minutes. He said, oh no, this is a catastrophe. I just want one number. So we're working on it. The other line there that's lighter is the number of surfacings per day. And you can see they don't even coincide, like one going up when the other's going down. This is a sperm whale at the surface, and I wanted to use this to show you the lower jaw with these spectacular teeth. You might have seen some of these in a museum. They're scrimshawed. I think we have a few out here in the exhibit area. Sperm whales have a very small jaw to be capturing these very fast squids that they eat. And we don't entirely, that wasn't even good. I was going to say we don't entirely know how they do it. We don't have a bloody clue. But I'll give you a couple swags, okay? So if you look at, and this unfortunately is a stranded sperm whale from that 1979 stranding off of Florence, where we had 43 whales on the beach at one time. But see, this lower jaw is all white, and you can't see in here, but so is the palate of the roof of the mouth. And that's true for all sperm whales, at least the palate sort of thing. How many of you have ever gone out at night in a boat and seen the wake of the motor produce a glowing water? Anybody? Yeah, so maybe a fourth of you guys. Well, that's caused by the pressure of the motor's energy causing little dinoflagellates to involuntarily produce light energy. And we think one of the swags here is that a sperm whale goes down, and he lowers his jaw 90 degrees to his body, moves through the water, and the ripples going around his teeth in the lower jaw cause a glowing, like you saw behind your boat. And that basically is a lure, because squids like light. They come investigate. So they come in, and bang, trap closes. So that's one of the swags. The old swag used to be that they would actually use the sound that they generate inside their head and their head is an acoustic lens to focus on a squid and bang on it and kill it or stun it, and then it would be easy prey. But the head proponent of that, Ken Norris, he and a friend of his, Bertil Mole, tried to stun squids with sound, and they took a blasting cap and put it in an aquarium with cuttlefish. Boom! A third of the cuttlefish could be burned, and it would still sit there sort of fat, dumb, and happy. Yep, okay. So you don't stun cuttlefish or other squids without air bladders with sound, apparently. And or it's so effective they don't know what they're doing after that, and they can still get away. These white marks here on the sperm whale, those are sucker disc marks from individual suckers on on squids. Think of it as a hickey, okay? That's been sucked so hard it depigments. It's actual scar tissue. Some of them that we find on sperm whales are up to 5 inches across from individual suckers. Big squid. Big. By the way, you don't have to worry about those kinds of squid when you swim. They're all deep water squids. The biggest one I've seen here in Newport was brought in by a trawler. It was 28 feet long. That was pretty good. I was really excited. There are a number of interactions between people and whales that we do need to be concerned about. Let me just stop and say that the oil and gas one, we looked at the incidence of seismic ships coming in close to the whales that we tagged out there, and we found that at least within 5 to 100 kilometers, the distribution of tagged whales was no different than what you would expect from random distribution. So if there is an effect, it's very small and close in. That's the first tangible, real scientific data about that kind of stuff that anyone had ever collected. And there's been a lot of emotional hysteria around some of this stuff, so it's pretty important. This sperm whale's got a net tangled in his lower jaw. This was taken in the Mediterranean. And just a reminder that the First Lady was saying about reducing the amount of gear for crab pots and lost gear. And nobody who fishes wants lost gear, but it does happen from time to time. And set nets and things like that go off and about. Some of these deep diving whales can get caught in that sort of stuff inadvertently. Gray whales are the most common whale we see along the Oregon coast. 90% of the sightings of whales that you see from shore here are probably gray whales. And sometimes of the year, almost 100%. And they are a filter feeding whale. They don't have teeth like sperm whales. This is the other species I'm going to spend a little bit of time with today. This animal is doing bottom feeding, and that's what we thought all gray whales did. They go into the bottom and they'd suck up an area about the size of a desktop and about 6 inches deep. And then they gargle it around, and just like you would do toothpaste, or maybe more like when you were a kid squeezing Jell-O through your teeth, they retain the things that are in those sediments. And what we found out more recently is that that's not entirely true everywhere. In fact, as gray whale populations have come back to their pre-exploitation numbers, now we see them as opportunists eating all kinds of things. I've seen them surface skim feeding on krill right next to blue whales. There's some very nice work up in the Depot Bay area that has shown mysids are really an important part of their diet there. And this is what the baleen filtering apparatus looks like from a rubber boat, and you're looking out at a gray whale with its mouth open. This is a friendly whale. We call her La Dentista, the dentist. And she will actually come up and open her mouth, and you can rub her tongue and gums. Don't worry, you don't do that here in Oregon, but down in Mexico, where she has a little idle time, that's her preferred way to visit. So we see gray whales along the coast doing behaviors like this spy hopping, where they come out of the water. It used to be thought that spy hopping was a visual orientation to things at the surface, but most of the time spy hopping doesn't bring the eye out of the water. So we think more and more it is for the animal to acoustically identify where something is. If this room were dark and somebody went to a corner and did that, we'd all turn our heads in that direction because of the change in the arrival time of the sound from one ear to the other, and we can triangulate easily. Whales appear to do that all the time. So here's the common pattern for whales, baleen whales, feeding up in high latitudes in the summer, coming down in the winter to reproduce in warmer water, and then going back. What are the attributes of the high latitudes in the summer? What's special about that? Cold water. I hear somebody say it's warmer. Light, yes. Long periods of light. You get far enough north, it's light 24 hours a day. When do you plant your garden? When the summer comes along and you get enough daylight and enough warmth in the soil for the seeds to germinate. Well, the same thing is happening with the ocean in terms of increased productivity. The waters down here aren't necessarily productive, but they are warm. And we think, and this is maybe perhaps another swag, that it's important for the mom to give birth in warmer waters where her calf has a body temperature like yours and mine, but is born in warmer waters so that she doesn't have the same kind, the calf doesn't have the disadvantage of keeping up with body heat in a real cold environment. So let's look at some of the migrations we've tracked. We've tagged whales down in Mexico and tracked mothers with calves all the way up. This is Bering Straits. These are the Aleutian Islands, Alaska, Siberia, all the way up into the high Arctic. And in fact, any whale we tracked for more than 100 days from Mexico went that far north. We've also tagged animals here along the Oregon coast that are called part of the Pacific Coast Feeding Group. It's about 200 whales from Northern California up into Southeast Alaska that don't do that really long migration. These animals are going to be the subject of a lot of intense scrutiny in the next 2 years, in part because of the macaw interest in hunting, and in part because some geneticists feel that this group may be genetically different than much of the rest of the gray whale population. So what we've done is we've tagged whales here in Oregon and tracked them all the way down to Scammons Lagoon and all the way back into the Pacific Northwest. And here's an animal that did even a farther trip. When she returned, she went all the way up to Icy Bay, Alaska, subsequently down to Vancouver Island. My wife loves this slide, and I'm just joking. She says, people want to see pictures of the whales. They don't care about the data stuff. But for the geeks out there, all 5 of you, this is going from September to September, and these are the latitudes. So the little arrows are where whales are tagged, and a whale that does this never migrated, and it didn't. So that was a shock to us. When people have said, oh, I've got these whales out my door, I see them all year round, I've gone, no, don't worry. They're just, they're whales there all year round, but they aren't the same whales. Trust me. Well, now I know that I'm wrong. Sometimes whales do this, but the bulk of them migrate south down to the latitude of Scammons Lagoon, and you can see their rates of travel are very similar. This one stopped off in the Channel Islands for 6 days. And you can see that the migration rates going north are the same slope also. This is one that went up to Icy Bay and then back down to British Columbia. This was the first time anybody had done anything like this, and we're actually going to go out and rework this population this summer, and our hope is to tag the exact same animals we did before, because we want to know whether whales do the same thing year after year. Nobody knows that, so that's kind of fun. It also has some practical value in terms of management. So these are some of those whales that I just showed you coming and going through the Southern California Bight. These are the Channel Islands, Los Angeles is over here, and the same colored animal going through the outer islands came back through the outer islands. Ones that went through the near shore going south came back through the near shore going north. It just says they're pretty consistent in what they're doing. Now, we went to Russia to tag some gray whales there. Their gray whales are the second most endangered large whale species in the world. And there are only 130 of them left, so obviously people are pretty worried about oil and gas development and things like that. So actually the studies I showed you doing things in the Northwest were done to demonstrate that the tags work and they don't do any harm to the whales. So we went out to tag, and the industry supplied us with a boat that was beautiful. Only problem is it was really noisy, really loud. We couldn't get close to whales. So we switched over to this little inflatable boat, and I'll show you what we did with it. You remember I told you the pulpit was important? That's the tree fort we built. And we extended the cruise twice in a matter of 5 days each. The weather was terrible. I mean, in a month we had 2 typhoons and 2 gales. Now, a typhoon is not something I would wish on anyone, not even my worst enemy. But you can get black and blue just being in bed in a typhoon. I'm going to show you what it's like to tag whales. So this is the first whale, a gray whale, we tagged off Russia. So that orange thing is just a push rod delivery system to get the tag out on the whale. That whale, named Flex, proved to be really interesting. We thought that the whales on our coast that go up and down, north-south, down to Mexico, we were going to see them going north-south on the Asian coast, going down, whoops, got that backwards for you. Going down our coast would go down the Asian coast, probably to the South China Sea. Instead, Flex, when he got done with his movements around Sakhalin Island, which is the place where he was that summer, this is an area of intense oil and gas development up here just north of Japan. Flex went across the Sea of Okhotsk, around Kamchatka, across the Bering Sea, through the Gulf of Alaska, and its last location was up here at Siletz. Well, actually, Salishan. The 5th of February. And everybody was, oh, what? So all of a sudden, maybe the second most endangered large whale isn't. It's the westernmost feeding area for the very common and abundant gray whale that we have here in the eastern North Pacific. But we don't know yet. The sample size is still small. So we went back this year, and we tagged 6 animals. Again, that same area I was showing you along Sakhalin Island. And there was an offshore area that people knew occasionally you'd see gray whales. Well, there were times when 5 out of the 6 whales were in this offshore area. So we know it's a lot more important than we did before. And as we kind of marched through the period of time, this animal traveled a long way. All of this area wasn't known to have gray whales in it. So a lot of discovery process as the animal shows us what we don't know. And when he finally left and went across the Sea of Okhotsk to the Kamchatka Peninsula, one of them, Vivara, turned north, and we went, oh, wonder what that's going to be about. She turned around and went around. These are 1-week summaries. Another one, Agent, started down into the Kuril Islands. And then they left the Kamchatka Peninsula, taking different routes, not only between them, but different route than Flex had taken the previous year. Across the Gulf of Alaska. And mind you, for gray whales, I'm guilty of this as well as other scientists, we always said they were bad navigators. So when they left Mexico, we said they hugged the coast so they keep the sound of the surf on the right-hand side, and eventually they get to Alaska. Duh. Here's an animal crossing the deep Bering Sea during huge storms on virtually what's the name of the course when you're going across a sphere?
Great Circle.
Great Circle route. Thank you very much. Amazing. I mean, something that would be challenging for us to do in a storm with reasonable equipment. So as this story unfolded, both Vivara's tag continued to work, Agent quit sort of out there, and the tags fall off, which is the bad story. These things are like a sliver, and they work their way out. But as she went farther south and crossed the Mexican border, we started wondering, well, where's she going to go to breed? Because we knew the breeding areas were Scammons Lagoon, Laguna San Ignacio, and Magny Bay. Well, the story was she did all of those. Spring break for whales is really special. She spent 40 days and visited every reproductive area. And then she came back north, and interestingly, she didn't follow the route that she took coming. Now, why is that important? By the way, look at how straight this route is across here. Just kind of remarkable. We think that calves learn their migration pattern from their moms. One of the virtues of mammals is that mothers suckle their young with milk, and so the calves are tied to the mom until they're weaned. Well, these animals don't wean until sort of August, September time period, so they leave these areas, and in fact, they'll be starting along our coast within a matter of a couple weeks. They'll be coming by. And they would learn how to get to the mother's feeding area by following their mom. They have to. They're going to suckle for another 4 or 5 months. Well, this animal, we thought, well, this is the route that she took with her mom. Certainly she's going to go back that way. Au contraire. She hasn't either read any of the books or been part of the discussions, and very independently has done exactly what most of the other gray whales have done, which is to follow the shoreline of the Gulf of Alaska. When she went through Unimak Pass here at the base of the Aleutians, we went, okay, now she's going to head to Russia. Nope. She took a right-hand turn, went around the peninsula, and actually came all the way up to where this is the heavy ice sheet. And this frame is just 2 days old. I looked it up this morning, and she's thought better of it. That's where the ice was, and this is where she is today. She's headed back southwest, so stand by. And if you'd like to follow this, look on our website for the Marine Mammal Institute, and every Monday we're posting the progress of Varvera, and you can watch it just like the scientists do unfolding. So if we look at all 3 whales that have come across, Flex, Varvara, and Agent, none of them have taken the same course. I have scientists write me every day going, I couldn't even imagine this. If you were inventing it, you wouldn't have tried to be anything this, dramatic. This is remarkable. But here's the expansion. She almost made it to Cabo San Lucas, spent time off Mag Bay, went into San Ignacio, spent time within Scammons Lagoon. So she's 9 years old. We kind of expect next year when she comes back, she's going to have a calf, which will be pretty special. I would be remiss if I didn't say how important private donation is to our field of science. And when I say our field, I mean broadly the Marine Science Center, what OSU does in general, and specifically what happens with our marine mammal research. This is a vessel gifted to us by the Hakama family from North Bend, Oregon. And we've added laboratory space to it. And, it has meant that we could track blue whales, for instance, not only put tags on them off California, but then go down to a place like Costa Rica and go 500 miles offshore to identify the first ever breeding and calving location for blue whales in the entire world. We asked for the vessel for that particular purpose, and they were generous. So has Terry Thompson been, and Jimmy Burns. So, and very indebted to people who've been able to give us resources like that. We've worked with a variety of folks in Russia, and I just wanted to acknowledge some of them. A very difficult place to work. That's an executive abstract of, yeah, let's leave it at that. It's a tough place. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of my history of tagging whales. So this is when I first came to OSU pretty much. Well, actually, I'd been here 4 years at the Marine Science Center when my wife, Mary Lou, and our 2 kids and our dog, and we packed up and we went to Baja to tag our first whale. We tried to get funding to do that from an agency, and they all said, I'm sorry, we don't do development work with tags, but if you had a tag that worked, we might fund you to do some things. And to Mary Lou's credit, she said, well, let's go do it. And I said, I can't find any money. So we sold the second car, second mortgaged the house, and we went on our vacation time. Now that's a woman. I tell graduate students to this day, the most important choice you'll make isn't what school you go to or what you do as a major, it's who you marry. Mary Lou, raise your hand. So, I mean, I'm going to be 66 this month, and I've been here at OSU for 39 years. I'm obviously really enjoying it. Got a lousy retirement program. Got to be there 60 years, No, I'm kidding. I've been eligible for a lot of years. What it is I'm having a really good time. And I'm also feeling really productive, and I went around a lot of great students and colleagues that were making some good discoveries. But I wanted to be kind of sober serious here for a moment. The little gal on the bumper that was my daughter is this woman whose third child is in her arms moments after birth. In biology, Sylvia was saying, the First Lady was saying, how important it was to think about things being sustainable. And in our private conversation, he was saying how important it was to her personally about biodiversity. And I know this community really well. I don't care if it's a fisherman or a NOAA biologist or somebody from OSU. We're sort of on that same page together. We aren't just in this for ourselves. It's future generations that we don't know yet. And that's the point of this, because, you know, when I had kids, I was worried a little bit. Whoops. No. Not the dreaded. Plum disappeared. Bear with me. So I can say what I may be able to actually say it easier without pictures, is that when we think about our children, we are necessarily concerned that they have a good environment, right? But when we think beyond our children to grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and generations we've not met yet, that's when you start to get the real impact of what it is we do with regard to the environment and what sustainability is really about. And we know that personally in terms of the economic times we're in right now. I don't care if you're a dirt farmer or you're a fisherman who harvests off the ocean, you want the environment to be producing for your families extended in the future. And so this is a granddaughter, this is Mary Lou, introducing, a whale. And this is a whale I have known for over 30 years. I've met her dozens of times. And I've met 6 of her calves. And when I write down there that her species has been around for millions of years, it has an effect for me because she doesn't vote. She doesn't have the choice to sell the second car or a second mortgage to the house. That environment that is necessary for her, she doesn't have a lot of choice about, okay? So this is, I think, a truism that I really like. In the end, we'll conserve what we'll love, we'll love what we understand, and we'll understand what we're taught. So I'm incredibly grateful to you for taking part of your Saturday afternoon to learn about whales. And I'm kind of hopeful that in my helping you understand, you'll love and help conserve. Because it's those of us in this room that can make a difference. And I'm probably, as a result, preaching to the choir, literally. And I see heads nodding through the audience. Yeah, you get it. And for real estate, it's location, 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 right? The same thing's true for animals. Many of them don't have choices about the areas that are important. And when the First Lady was saying about protected areas and how fishermen and the conservation groups were coming to the same conclusion about things and setting things aside. In point of fact, Ducks Unlimited, Elk Foundation, all these sort of hunter groups were some of the very first that were the conservation groups because they wanted to see those species perpetuated to be able to enjoy the same things on into the future. I'm almost done. So I'm going to make a pitch to you and say, if you like breathing the food we eat and you want to think about children, you ought to think about investing in the future actually as an investment as well. I know you're going to do right by your kids and all that, but I think everybody ought to tithe 10% of what's left over into the environment. And I don't care what organization it is, although Oregon State's a great one, and the Marine Mammal Institute's a wonderful buy, but seriously, you want to put something towards the future because the present has given us so much. And I honestly think in the baby boomer generation, my age class, we're going to turn over more money in our generation than the last 3 generations. We've been very blessed, but we need to think about putting some of that back. Now, that sounds a little preachy, but this, if not us, who, and if not now when, probably has never been more important to think about than at a time when humans are the keystone species that are changing the environment no matter where they go. We can live anywhere as a result of how we import energy and change things to our own liking. So, as you see this hand reaching out for a whale, this whale is watching us, And I honestly think that, we're the ones that have to be responsible and do the right thing. And I encourage you, as you think about habitat, to extend it like an adjective to every issue you encounter in the natural world. And I'll just tell you that, even though the print isn't here, this is a blue whale feeding. And most of the large whales eat small things. And this is krill in here. It's the reason it looks unfocused. But the shell formation of krill is like what you've read in the newspaper this week about acidification causing problems for oyster spat and whatnot. This is a real critical issue that oceanographers are looking at very seriously. 2 more slides left. So you see the Pacific storm there and a blue whale in the foreground. The blue whale weighs as much as our ship. And really, just think about this fact that, remember, they look to us for care, both for their world and for ours. We've been blessed to have some really strong sponsors over the years. Several of them you might be surprised at, the Sea Petroleum companies here. I have to say I'm really quite impressed with a company that has risk by funding research in an area where it could come back and hurt them. But every one of them I've encountered has said, we're really happy to be monitored and regulated around real information. It's emotional hysteria that we're really concerned about. We will fund good science, and we will be happy to take the consequences, chips fall where they may. And so that's been really important. O&R has actually funded some of my work for no more than 30 years and has been so important to my career development. That said, you know that there's naval issues out there in sonar. I can tell you I'm going to spend next week in Washington, D.C. as part of an Office of Naval Research review on all the things they're doing with marine mammals. And I can tell you they're spending a lot of money on it. And there's some people that they fund that are not huge fans of what they do. My own feeling about that is we all want to be safe, and we're very fortunate to have people in the services who are helping us do that, be safe. But there are ways that they can do that in such much of the time for practice and things like that that don't necessarily endanger the environment. And finally, Mary Lou did this quilt. Some of you know Steve Brown, who is a local veterinarian, passed away in February. Just sort of a small statement of appreciation to him for his work with the Stranding Network, which some of you may have visited Jim Rice out there. And I will say that the Prescott funds that fund the stranding networks of North America have been taken off the administration's 2013 budget. It's one of those things that these mammals are sort of the canaries in the coal mine for us. If they can't live off of a fish diet or have issues with flame retardants or harmful algal blooms, there but for the grace of God go us. At this time in our society, these animals are the sentinels that give us a sense of what's going on with regard to ocean health. And so I hope there's some way of continuing the support for that. If some of you feel impassioned about that, we'd be interested in talking to you about helping us fund that. There are a dozen people in this room that I would love to mention by name, but I didn't ask them ahead of time, who've been so very, very important to our work. I want to thank each and every one of you for that. And those of you who are taxpayers and are a little concerned about how much this might all cost, I want to tell you that we have less than 1/2 of one person's salary in all of the Marine Mammal Institute tied to the state of Oregon. Almost all the money we bring in is of the type that Dr. Spinrad was talking about, coming in not only from federal grants, but from corporate contracts. In the last 9 months, just my program has brought in $1.75 million of money into Oregon. And we have a group of 33 people that are supported by out-of-state money. So I think what you see here at the Marine Science Center has been a very, very good investment. It's going to be returning not only in our generation, but for many generations to come. And I'll just say thank you very much, and I'm open to some questions. Our newest employee, Minda Stiles. Minda, put your hand up. She's just started working with us the last 2 weeks, so she's kind of here checking it out and seeing whether we talk the talk. Yeah, questions? Anybody? Yes.
How far in miles does that Barbara whale go?
Great question. How far has Varvara gone? Her one-way migration from Russia to almost the tip of Cabo San Lucas is a brand new world's record for a mammal. It's 6,550 miles one way. During that time, she's not eating at all. She's been without food now for 5 months. So she's doing all that off the fat that she developed during the feeding season. It's another reason why the habitat, access to the good quality areas to feed, is so important, because for them, that's where they put enough calories away to last them for the full year, even though they're only there half the time. Yeah. Yes?
How do whales navigate?
The question was, how do whales navigate? Duh. I wish I knew. I mean, that's an oversimplification. There's a paper out three months ago that was talking about celestial navigation. Flex came across in a huge storm system. I'm sure he not only didn't see stars, he never even saw sunlight. 30-foot waves through the Bering Sea. Well, there's a lot of possibilities, and one of them is that there's dead reckoning using seamount systems and things like that, where you expect them to go from point to point to point. But we don't see that happening. We see it sometimes for some species. Humpback whales, about a third of them, we've seen them use what appear to be seamounts. Magnetite, which is in the brains of some fish and some birds. Whales are really big. The dissection you do to find out whether there's magnetite has to be done without the benefit of a metal knife. Imagine dissecting a humpback whale without the use of a metal knife or a chainsaw, for that matter. But one calf has been done. In fact, somebody in this at the Marine Science Center here was a party to that. And Jeanette Baker, and it showed that there may be an influence of magnetite for some of them. That doesn't mean they all take straight north bearing or anything like that, but they may have the geomagnetic anomalies. Is another. You can go down the list, but what we see in terms of the variability between individuals and between species has got us all kind of still in awe. And these gray whales are the latest on the list of just awe. Yeah, there's another. Yeah.
Been a lot of talk and written about the naval experimentation with sonar, its effect on marine mammals. Do they know anything more about whether, as far as I can read, they've never proven one way or the other? Do you have any new data on that?
Yeah, so let me do that two different ways. The Navy's done a lot of work on biosonar of the animals, how they do their own sonar. And the animals are incredible. They are used frequently in the recovery of drones, missiles, torpedoes for practice. So sea lions and beluga whales, bite plate, go down to hear the ping, attach it, come back up, get a fish, and they haul back their ordnance. On the flip side, about what you're talking about is probably mid-frequency sonar the Navy's used. The Navy has taken responsibility for the deaths of beaked whales in several areas. This is not a matter that the sound actually kills the animal directly. It appears to be that the animal is frightened and zooms to the surface. And any of you who are divers know about staged decompression, where you need to spend time at intermediate depths to let your blood equilibrate and let the nitrogen come out of you, and so forth. Well, when they zoom to the surface, these particular species of beaked whales do what are called bounce decompression. They don't have a scuba tank, so they rush to the surface, get a breath, go to an intermediate depth, stay for a while, get another breath, go to another intermediate depth, and then they're okay to do another dive series. Well, In this case, they just zoom to the surface and stay there. And the embolize that it result kill them. They bleed from all the orifices, they're goners. So the Navy's working on, I'd say, 3 main fronts. One is to change the character of the signal so it sounds less, they use an upswept tone that has some semblance to killer whales. So that's a biologically significant sound for an animal. They're trying to make a commitment to practice in areas where that's not likely to have those species. And they're doing a really strong job of surveillance of areas before they do things like ship shock trials and things that could cause problems. So I think they're trying, but they recognize that there's a challenge there. And what they're looking for with mid-frequency sonar are battery-operated submarines. So they're normally the old diesel class kind of thing, but when you put nuclear prop technology, they're so quiet you can't hear them on the SOSUS arrays. And unfortunately, they're very affordable too, so it's like terrorism class warfare kind of thing. So those can come right up on the shelf off New York or Washington, D.C. Yeah.
When is one most likely to see a whale off the coast of Oregon?
Oh, that's a good question. When are you most likely to see a whale off the coast of Oregon? You can see them any month of the year, but the best month in terms of volume would be early January, when about 30 whales an hour are headed south. 18,000 gray whales go by basically in about 5 weeks. However, if you want to have an experience out of the ocean, it's illegal to approach whales as close as some of the photographs I showed you, which are taken in Mexico under special permit. But you could go out of like Depot Bay or some here and see whales during the summer very reliably. We have some of that Pacific Coast food group of whales that are right here and available throughout the summer. Well, I'll be happy to stay if you have questions. I'll take one more question. Yeah.
What's your favorite species of whale?
I was hoping to get by without that. Okay, I'll just say that for absolute sheer beauty, blue whales. When you see a blue whale coming up through the water, it starts out as this ghostly gray image, and pretty soon it's starting to look like a submarine, and then it's blue. It's just spectacular. And I have seen blue whales body surf in 30-foot waves where you can see a third of their length into the wave, and they're just stunning. They don't breach very well. At 100 tons, it's pretty hard to get more than half the body out of the water, but they, very, very beautiful animal. In terms of the science and the mystique and sort of the most secretive animal, sperm whales are incredible. All the sperm whales we've tagged stay down for over an hour on one breath. They come up and recharge their batteries and back down they go. They almost all work 24 hours a day through their 6-month feeding seasons. They don't stop. And no sleeping cycles, nothing like that. So I think sperm whales are probably the most awesome of the animals. Whew. Hopefully you'll accept that. But I'll stay afterwards if you have questions that are too embarrassing to ask.